Welcome to the GOYA Gatherings podcast, a serene and inspiring space where the worlds of yoga and wellness converge. Every episode is a journey into the heart of yoga, offering you deep insights, uplifting stories, and practical wisdom. Our conversations are designed to inspire your journey and illuminate your path to well-being. Please remember that the views expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of GOYA Gatherings or its hosts.
Welcome to the GOYA Gatherings podcast. My name's Mark. I'm part of the leadership team here at GOYA. Today, our episode is The Business of Teaching Yoga, From Passion to Profession with Mado Hesselink. I'm really excited to have Mado on the podcast today. I think you're going to get a lot of really useful and pertinent information and some tips and ideas about how to create a sustainable teaching career, some pitfalls maybe to avoid along the way, and resources that you can hopefully use to really make your passion of teaching yoga sustainable and successful. So, Mado, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today.
My pleasure.
We have a lot of things that we want to get through, and we'll see how that flows. But I wondered if, first of all, you could just share a little bit about who you are so that the listeners can get a sense of what the flow our conversation is going to take today.
Yeah, I started teaching yoga in 2005. So that's about 20 years ago now. And I absolutely loved it from the get-go. I had a lot, I think like many people, a lot of beautiful visions of what it looked like to be a yoga teacher. And I would say after teaching for a few years, I knew I really wanted to do this. Like, this is what I wanted to do with my life. And at that time, really what we had was this yoga studio business model. And I did know some people who seemed to be making a sustainable career teaching for yoga studios. But at the time that I started teaching, there was sort of like this explosion of teachers and competition. And after a few more years, it became really clear to me like, wow, I don't know that this is ever going to happen partnering with yoga studios. And of course, since then, that trend has just magnified 100 or 1,000-fold. It is harder and harder and harder to make a sustainable living partnering exclusively with yoga studios for many reasons, including the cost of real estate. So I would say in 2012, my mom passed away. And she, it turns out, had only $400 in her bank account when she died. Yeah. And it felt like a big wake-up call to me. It was like an invitation because I was never somebody who was interested in business at all in any way, shape, or form. Like, that just sounded like the most boring thing on the planet. But when this happened, I suddenly became interested in doing things differently. I was like, I don't think that I want to die with $400 in my bank account. I don't want to get to that point in my life. And as a yoga teacher, that's a very real possibility, right? So I started to seek out mentors and ways to learn about business and ways to learn how to make teaching yoga, sharing yoga, a more sustainable career option. And I worked with a bunch of different people. And one of those people was Rachel Cook, who challenged me. Her business now is, I can't remember the name of her business exactly, but I think she has a podcast called Promote Yourself to CEO. So definitely check that out. At the time, she was branded as the Yogipreneur, I think. So she challenged me to have 100 conversations with yoga teachers, because by that time I had been teaching for over a decade and I really enjoyed working with yoga teachers. And she said, okay, if that's your niche, you need to talk to 100 yoga teachers. And so my daughter was maybe 2 years old at the time, my daughter who's now 10. And during her naps, I would have these 30-minute phone calls, and I had a spreadsheet and I had questions. And it was like I made a project of it and I was organized, but also it was like this really deep, beautiful connection with people who cared about the same things that I cared about. And about halfway through that project, I was like, I don't want to stop this. I want to keep having conversations with yoga teachers. I want to keep talking about these things and learning about what other people are going through, because there was these threads, these themes where we're all experiencing the same thing, but we all feel really alone. That was one of the threads that kept coming up over and over. And I'm guessing with your yoga association, that's part of what you're trying to address as well. So I decided about halfway through these 100 conversations to start a podcast so that I could not only keep having conversations with yoga teachers, but also let others in on the conversation, let others listen in. So that's what I've been doing since 2018. And yeah, I'm still doing it to this day.
That's amazing. I love that it started with like that 100 conversations. It feels like such a really kind of organic way to begin, and that it grew from there. And I think that, I mean, I shared with you my story before we started, but it sounds like there's probably thousands of yoga teachers out there with a similar story to either both of us, or similar in some ways, and that so it's not necessarily just like that I was looking for answers. It was also like, how do I find other teachers? Because in the studio setting that I was in exclusively, it was very isolating. Like, you go teach your class, you get a sub when you need to, but I had no one to ask anything to. So like thinking that you, like, even back before, like 2018 is like a fairly long time ago in the terms of like the evolution that yoga's seen over the last few years. I mean, that's huge. So then you started this amazing resource for yoga teachers, and now are there multiple arms to that besides the podcast that you're offering now?
That's such a great question, Mark. I have some partnerships with specific yoga teachers, but the main thing that I offer is a membership, a support membership for yoga teachers. And so we meet once a week, and we have simple rituals and routines to make space and time for connecting with each other, and then also for the big picture thinking that tends to fall by the wayside when you are a solopreneur person who is passionate about what you do, and like what you do is what you want to focus on. Yet there's all of these other aspects to your business that need to have a place as well. So the Impact Club is the name of my membership. And inside of that, I help you carve out space for those things and make it fun, because you're not doing it alone. We're doing it together.
But fun is such a key, I would imagine, for people like myself who aren't business minded, that it doesn't feel like a chore.
Yeah. And let's explore that term, business minded, because what does that mean?
To me, when I guess when I say that, is like, I guess it's a little bit self-deprecating in a way, because it's what I imagine, like, it's business minded is like someone who's like quite cold, has a, understand, like, everything's like a figure, or financially driven. And so it's probably a huge misconception that I have in my mind about that term. But yeah, that's what comes to mind right away for me.
Well, I'm really glad you brought it up, because I think you're right that it's an idea. It's a way that I think the way that you described it, no yoga teacher is business minded. None of us are. So what does that then mean for us as running businesses? maybe instead of being business minded, what we can do is we can learn from the principles of business. And like, we can even set aside, like, maybe there are people who are business minded, but I think using the term business minded or I'm not business minded kind of absolves us of responsibility, right? And it's sort of others, people who we perceive as maybe having those qualities, instead of saying, okay, there are lessons and ideas and systems and strategies from business that are very compatible with yoga and can really enrich our lives as yoga teachers. We don't have to become business minded in order to benefit from those. And instead, what we can do is choose for ourselves which elements from business are aligned for our values.
Mind is blowing. It's so simple too, how you explained it, but I'd never thought of it that way. I like really compartmentalized in my mind. There's yoga and business, but even just that really simple approach of thinking, what can I take from there and apply? I mean, that would change somebody's life in a huge way quite quickly, I would imagine.
I think that certainly being open-minded to new information is really key for anybody to be successful, whatever their chosen path.
So that's interesting. So I had a question, which was, what are the common misconceptions that yoga teachers might have about running their own business? So we've just identified a huge misconception that I have. Are there any others that are sort of quite apparent as well that you see out there in the world?
Well, I think this is less common now, but especially when I first started down this path, I think the first misconception was the fact that it is a business, because we live in a capitalist culture and we need financial resources in order to survive. If we want to have yoga, teaching yoga be what provides those financial resources, then it is a business. And that's a very neutral term, right? I think it's important to separate our maybe reactionary ideas about how some other people who are in business have behaved from the ideas and principles of running a business. Because the moment that we see that as toxic, then it becomes something that we are kind of like, trying to keep away from ourselves. And then if we try to behave in a way that is supportive for our business, then it feels out of alignment with our values, right? So I think it's really important to see, okay, that business is neutral. It can be done in a really ethical way. It can be done in an unethical way. And just because some people choose to not be ethical about it does not make the whole thing unethical.
Wow.
It's like each of us is responsible for using these tools ethically. I mean, even if you think about the Yoga Sutras and the magical powers that yoga is supposed to allow us to access, right? Those can be used in positive, supportive ways, and they can be misused as well. So it's just a tool, right? And the less preconceived notions we have about that tool, the more useful it's going to be for us.
I love that idea too of like thinking ethical business, because the misconception I have is like business is not ethical. Like if done well, and it's an interesting dichotomy in my brain. Is like successful business, obviously in there's some, it's not ethical in some way, like someone's suffering because of that, but thinking that like as you have the power yourself because you are running your own business to make choices that align with the teachings of yoga and also what it is that you want to put out there in the world. I think I could feel a big shift in my mind when you said the word ethical. And I was like, oh yeah, that's huge. Again, like a small, tiny like seed that you planted, but I can already see how that would make a difference.
I think one of the big models we have for businesses is these big multinational corporations that are putting profits as their only priority. And that is deeply, deeply problematic. But there are other models of business that we can look to. And the one that I know about specifically is triple net or B Corps. And so a B Corp is supposed to balance profit, benefit to the customer, and benefit to the community. So benefit to the shareholders, benefit to the customers, benefit to the communities. There's like these three prongs. And one, in a chair, right, a stool with three prongs, all three prongs are important, and you're not prioritizing one over the other. So I personally think that these big multinational corporations, like this is extremely imbalanced. It is extremely scary, the amount of profit they have or power they have. That is not a model that I want to follow. But looking at these triple net corporations is much more inspiring to me and gives me some sense of hope for the future.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I've seen that B Corp symbol on so many things and never thought to look further into it. I see it and assume, oh, this is okay. But I never really looked at what the principles were to be a B Corp. I just kind of go by the logo. But now thinking about that, that does make sense that they would have that balance between the different arms. Wow. We're only a few minutes in and I'm already blown away by what you're sharing. So in your experience, so let's say there's a hypothetical new yoga teacher out there.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be kind of, as a new yoga teacher, what would be maybe some of the pitfalls that you would not maybe warn against, but maybe advise about that they might encounter right off the bat? Because I experienced this myself as kind of beginning, maybe not on the right footing. So I was wondering what you might suggest or what you've experienced to share with newer yoga teachers.
Well, I think the first thing I'd say to new yoga teachers is don't be in a rush to be dependent on your teaching income fully for your living, because that adds a lot of burden of stress. And yoga is a discipline that unfolds over a long period of time. And so it's important to have some patience with yourself if you want to teach yoga as your full-time career. This is not something that you can. I think it's best not to try to rush it and to give yourself time to marinate in becoming a really good teacher first. I think that's the first thing I would say. Don't be in a rush to be a full-time teacher. It is fine to teach part-time for a decade. And then you can build in your learning of business and creating a thoughtful strategy for becoming a full-time teacher if you want to over a longer period of time, rather than getting to this place where your electric bill needs to be paid. And now you're maybe presented with an ethical quandary, but your electric bill needs to be paid. Like that's not a nice position to be in. And I would just think it's just so much more supportive for people to be more gradual in their pursuit of a sustainable career versus like jumping off the deep end.
Do you think that the studio model for a yoga teacher, like that idea of I'm employed by a studio, they give me classes, they pay me a flat rate, is sustainable?
I think you have to do the math for where you live. But in the last 10 years, I have seen that math get harder and harder to justify.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what people are paying, how many students there are, what the cost of living is everywhere in the world. But the people that I work with are often being offered $40 a class, and their rent is like $4,000 a month. And so, you know what I'm saying? The math is not mathing for working for a studio as your full source of income. I have some ideas of what I think is sustainable. The business models that I've seen work usually include something low cost or easy to enter into, like it could be partnering with a studio who is supportive of you having outside projects. It could include teaching your own classes. It could include having some online classes, but having something that's easy for people to find you and build a relationship with you. And then one or more of 3 higher ticket offerings: retreats, private sessions, or teacher trainings, or perhaps 2 of them or all 3 of them.
Interesting. Because when I started teaching, the studio was the model. This was 15 years ago, was the model in, and it was sort of the goal, I think, for a lot of people who were teaching at the same time or starting out teaching when I was teaching. And it seemed like it would be that way forever, but it definitely, things change, but it seemed like per class rates didn't kind of move at the same rate that everything else was shifting.
They actually went down.
Yeah, which is, that's, so it's, I guess, I just want to preface this for people. This is not the questions that we had planned for this episode today, but we're sort of just going with the flow. So I hope it's okay that I throw these at you because, so do you think, because lots of studio owners were or are yoga teachers, and then if studios are offering less than livable wage rates for their yoga teachers, I'm just wondering how it might be difficult to answer, but where's that disconnect from a person who maybe had that experience before they opened their studio of teaching so many classes to make it through, and then it's continuing that same narrative with their studio. But I guess it maybe relates back to what you mentioned about rent, and that's also out of the control. But I was just curious if you had any wisdom on that.
Well, I think there are 2 types of studio owners. There are the ones who used to be yoga teachers and the ones who didn't.
Mm-hmm.
The ones who used to be yoga teachers, or maybe still are, I think they went into opening their studio with the best of intentions and see themselves as providing a service for their community. Also see how much they personally have on the line, and are probably very, very stressed and anxious and working very, very hard.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they are doing the best they can. But in most locations, and certainly not every location, but in most locations, the cost of real estate is just squeezing studio owners more and more. And so as the studio owners are squeezed, they're looking for release valves, and how can they keep this business that they have poured themselves into. And so this is just one of the strategies, ends up being, paying teachers less and less, often hiring younger and younger and less experienced teachers. I'm sure there's lots more to it as well. I would just say that I feel a lot of empathy for studio owners, the ones who used to be yoga teachers and are in it because of their, passion for yoga. That's not always the case. There are also corporate studio owners who are absolutely taking that, really stripped back single net approach to yoga. And that is very heartbreaking to see that. But yeah, as far as the ones who used to be or still are yoga teachers, I think that's a tough position to be in. And, to some degree, I'm grateful that they are doing the work that they're doing because it is providing a home for yoga for people. And so I'm not here to control the global experience of yoga. And if a studio owner is able to make it work and they're in partnership with yoga teachers who are willing to teach for what they're willing to pay, that's their business. That's, on up to them to negotiate with each other. And especially for lifetime yoga teachers, for teachers who've been teaching for decades, usually teaching at a studio is going to be a very small portion of their income. And it's almost going to be more of service than anything else. Like, okay, I'm going to teach for this below value rate. And I'm going to maybe even teach for free sometimes because I want to provide access. I want people to have access to yoga. I want people to have a home for yoga. And they probably can't do that exclusively.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. That does make sense. I hadn't thought about so much about like I guess as not a studio owner, the difficulties of running a studio and what that must be like. And when you said, you mentioned like having a home for people for yoga, like they really do turn into these such like I loved the studios that I taught at because of the people who came. And even though, maybe the wage for classes didn't always align with what was necessary to live, it was oftentimes I just wanted to go because I wanted to see the people and I wanted to share what I loved, and that sometimes did outweigh the financial aspect of it. But I wonder if I'd known you at that time, if I would have kept that, like you were saying, and then looked outside of there where I had more control and could set prices and get a better income. But which is why I think what you're doing and having these conversations with yoga teachers as well is so important, because it isn't isolating. It's almost like a performer, like performers in different arts. It's quite lonely. And I think yoga teaching can be quite lonely, and we can feel alone and not know that there's options. And I think that just some of the simple things that you've suggested, if I'd known them, it could have made a big difference at that time in my life. I'm grateful for the experience that I had, but at the same time, like these spaces are so critical for learning and community as people sharing yoga.
I totally agree.
So I have a question, which is for you, as a professional, what does a sustainable yoga career look like for you, like in your mind, like someone who's a full-timer?
Yeah. It looks like what I described earlier, that there is a way for people to find you, because any business requires new customers, because people are going to move on, get into something else, move away, whatever it is. So you need a way for new people to find you. And sometimes a lot of that can be word of mouth, but there needs to be an easy way to work with you that is going to be low cost. So public classes you run on your own, classes at a studio, classes at a YMCA, classes at a community center, classes at a church, some easy way for people to get to know your style and build trust with you. and then some way for them to work with you more deeply. One-on-one sessions, teacher trainings, retreats are usually the most common ones.
I love that. I love thinking about having both of those kind of buckets filled in some way. Because I did used to teach 20 plus classes a week, which was unsustainable. And then I got into teacher trainings, and it was, part-time teaching, doing teacher trainings. And it was such a huge, like, I felt like I was a better teacher because I had more variety in the ways that I was sharing yoga, but also wasn't as like, because that 20 plus classes a week can really drain a person, I think. Well, that's my experience at least. So thinking about having those different buckets to fill I think is a really helpful tool for teachers.
Especially if those 20 classes a week are all drop-in classes and the students are constantly changing. Because I think when we think about the private sessions, the teacher trainings, the retreats, one of the things they have in common is a stronger container where you're going to get to work with the same people over a longer period of time, and you're going to get to go deeper. And that's really rewarding and helps yoga teachers fill their cup as well as their wallets.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's important for yoga teachers? Because it is quite an overwhelming field in some way. There's many different styles of yoga. There's different ways that we can share it. Do you think it's important for teachers to specialize, or is that something that just occurs naturally over time?
I think both. I think everybody is themselves. And so to some degree, they're specializing.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that people have different affinities and life experience. And some people are going to really thrive on specializing and going very, very deep into a body of knowledge that is more specific. And other people are going to thrive more on variety. And one of the things that I've seen in the last 8 years since the conversations around business have become more frequent is people trying to force themselves to specialize too early before they're really ready. I do think it's important for a newer teacher to try out a bunch of different ways of teaching, a bunch of different environments for teaching, types of students, and see where you thrive versus trying to pigeonhole yourself before you're really fully cooked as a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Fully cooked. I love that. Sounds lovely. Okay. This, at least for me, it was a bit of a touchy subject when I began teaching, but an important one, that I think having a healthy relationship really makes a big difference, but money. So, how do we set prices for services? How do we ask for more money? How do we approach that part of it when we're not in control as much? If it is more of a studio setting or, teaching at a community center, still it depends on what they're offering. Like, how do we, I say we, probably me, but how do yoga teachers sort of approach the financial aspect of running their business?
I think first we have to acknowledge that money is the currency of how we express what we value in this culture.
We need that on a t-shirt. That's huge.
So just like I said, okay, business principles are not inherently good or bad. They're just tools. Money is a tool. A lot of people have a lot of baggage and stories around money, and that makes it much more complicated for them. So as much as possible, if we can see money as a tool, a neutral tool, and a tool that people use to express their values, and recognize that each of our students has agency. This is a core component of yoga, is agency and critical thinking. Our students have agency for how they want to spend their money. So everything we do should be about an invitation where they get to choose if this is a way that they want to express what they value or if they don't. And to recognize as much as possible, it's easier said than done. It's not a personal thing. It's not about us. It's not about our intrinsic value. It's about what that student values. And yes, we need a certain amount of this currency in order to pay our bills. And each of us is responsible for figuring out a sustainable way to get that, right? For ourselves. So for some people, that ends up being, I don't want to always be asking people for money for yoga. I would rather get a part-time job doing bookkeeping or working in a store or whatever, being a massage therapist, whatever you would rather do. That's great. Or if you have found a system, some offerings, classes, workshops, private sessions, if you found something that you're offering that people are excited about and people are regularly saying, yes, I'd like to give you money for this. I'd like to give you money for your time, your energy, your expertise, then you're having a mutually beneficial transaction. You're having a transaction that supports you to pay your bills, supports you to fulfill your potential and share what you love, and supports them to express what they value and to experience your attention, your energy, and your expertise. So it's always a mutual exchange. And the thing about being the person who sets the prices is that you are the one who's then committed. You set your prices and then you are committed to those prices, whereas the other person always gets to say yes or no. So I think seeing our students as like fully autonomous beings with agency is a core component, and seeing money as inherently neutral is the other component. And then once you've sort of like freed up some of those tendrils that make things complicated, then you get to experiment. You get to say, okay, I'm going to charge this amount. Let's see what people say. Let's see how people react. Let's see how many people raise their hands. Okay, gosh, so many people raise their hands. I think I might be charging a little too little. I'm going to raise my prices a bit. Let me try this. And that's, there's no perfect price. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions or things I've seen around pricing holding yoga teachers back is thinking that they can just guess the right price and get it right. But that doesn't exist because it's only the right price for a specific relationship, for a specific person. So no matter how much you charge, you're pretty much always going to be too expensive for somebody and too cheap for somebody. Like somebody is probably going to look at your prices and be like, they can't be any good. They're not charging enough. Right? So I think that's the third component, is just stepping away from the idea that you can get it right and just trying, just experimenting.
I love what you mentioned, like no one's like people, your students are autonomous. Like no one forces me to buy anything that I don't want to buy. And if I see value in something, I'm willing to, like to buy vegetables from the local farm. Like I'm so willing to do that because it aligns with my values and I'm happy to support them. But thinking about that in relationship to teaching a yoga class or setting a price for something, I can see like why there's such value in working with someone like yourself, because it's these mindset shifts that are making me realize that these habits that I have in other areas of my life could be applicable in this particular area of my life. And that I already have that experience. So it wouldn't be something like a massive different way of thinking. It's just applying it in different ways, which I think is such a useful tool to have out there in that world.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that is an exercise I have people do a lot when they're struggling with pricing, is look at their own spending and ask themselves, what do I feel really good about spending money on? What are the things that I'm like, absolutely take my money? And that's a relationship you want to have with your students. And, if you look at maybe your own teachers, you can probably even put yourself in the role of yoga student and be like, I am happy to support my teachers. So it's super interesting, isn't it? How like just flip the role and all of a sudden it becomes like really angsty. Whereas your student's not overthinking it this way.
Mm-hmm. It's such a relief too to think about that you're not responsible for everything, like that, and that things are, I think it was really, what was really important for me too is when you mentioned that it's like trial and error a little bit. If you feel like it's too low, that like you're not stuck in any particular sort of way of pricing or a particular price point forever, because you're in control. You can adjust it. And I think having that, knowing that there's flexibility too, because I think like many yoga teachers, I was looking for like, what's the number, but it's region dependent, it's city dependent, it's country, like there's so many. And also for yourself, like, what do I need? And I hadn't really thought about that. Like, I have a friend who taught yoga for a long time and then she became a massage therapist, and now she offers yoga for free because she loves teaching and she just wants to share it with her massage clients or to the community there. And so happy. And it's not the financial aspect of it, because that's taken care of, which allows this person to then offer what it is that they want to offer from the perspective of yoga. So it's just, there's so many different ways to think about it that I could imagine that it's equally overwhelming for people, but also really freeing and liberating.
Yeah, I mean, money is definitely a way that we as humans get really mucked up around our value. And it's important, I think, as yoga teachers specifically, to remember that from the perspective of the yoga philosophy, all beings have equal value. All beings are completely and eternally worthy. So how much you make doesn't actually, is not a reflection of your worth. And it's also not a reflection of the worth of yoga, because yoga transcends money, right? So it's an agreement of an energy exchange that both parties need to feel good about. That's ultimately the goal of pricing and charging for yoga. And so for your friend, she feels good about charging nothing. Yeah. And hopefully her students feel good about it too. Some of them might not, right? Some of her students might be like, I have to give you something. I have to give you something. I don't feel good about this, right? So yeah, I think the idea here is the more that we can sort of divorce our own identity and our own neuroses from the conversation around pricing and just say, look, this is the world we live in, and we're going to do our best to find a price and to find an energy exchange that feels good for everyone. And that means it won't be a good fit for everyone. Some people address that by doing sliding scale pricing. Some people address that by giving scholarships. Some people address that by saying, I'm not the right teacher for everyone. That's one of the ways that as a yoga teacher, your work is to do the introspection and to figure out like what your values are driving you to do as far as pricing goes. But it's so much easier when it's not about like my worth, my value.
Yeah, I'd like separating that, I think, is really important, because I can definitely imagine that for myself and many that is wrapped in. Like, I'm only getting $50 for a class, and, am I only worth $50 for my time? And what if I feel like this sense that I maybe might be worth more? Like, just I wonder too, like, I'm very aware of time, but to sort of like bring this full circle back to what it is that you do and what you put out there in the world, I wonder if you could maybe share a little bit about why community is so important for yoga teachers in terms of developing a business and understanding these principles.
Oh my gosh, great question. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of what you were describing earlier is the types of thoughts that bounce around in our heads as entrepreneurs, as solo yoga teachers. And we don't usually have a format or people to verbalize them to. And when a thought bounces around in our head too much, it kind of gets amplified. And so we end up wasting a lot of time and energy and getting to the point where, like, I don't even know what I believe anymore because I've been like, this thought has been bouncing around, and samskaras. It's like these grooves we're digging for ourselves. So our fellow yoga teachers who are going through the same things, they're these perfect mirrors to hold up where we can share, here's what I'm thinking. And then they can be like, yeah, I had that thought too. And here's another perspective. And here's what I did. And when these thoughts are now put out into community, into a group or an individual who gets what you're going through, then there's a chance to sort of evolve the conversation instead of having it just dig the same groove deeper and deeper. That to me is the importance of community. And then what we talked about in the very beginning is just fun. It's just more fun with friends.
It's so many things in life are that way. Well, I think I hadn't really put that piece together, but like you just mentioned, because you could have the same conversation and just be circular, but then having someone like yourself there to guide and to offer would obviously add so much value to those needed conversations, and then to offer steps and ideas and tools to help people grow and to expand what that is, I think is huge, and something that may be lacking in the yoga community is the possibility to do that and the ability to do that. Which is why this episode is coming out on January 1st, which I think for a lot of people is like a new beginning, or they like to think of it as setting those goals or trying something new. So I think this is like a really cool call to action. If anything that we've spoken about today resonates with people, I hope that they know that all the ways to contact you are going to be here in the episode notes and links to get in touch with you, because I think that January 1st is a really, although it's hard to think about it now, we're a few months away, but it's a nice time if you're looking to make change to begin that. And I think that finding a community and thinking about how we share yoga in this way, like the business mind, the financial mind, and finding others like us is really important. So hopefully the timing is great for some people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your great questions and your awesome reactions to to some of my ideas. I really appreciate it.
That's just my usual reaction to most things. Is quite large for a British person who's usually quite muted, because I think what I loved is just the way you present information, which I think is really important. Is it's I don't want to say simple because it might downplay the impact that it has, but it's very logical. But I could see how I could go my whole life and never think about it that way. Like ethical business, why did that never come to my mind? I've been in this field for so long, And so I think that when I meet people who are able to just kind of like lift up these things, this knowledge and this wisdom in a really presentable, logical way, I think that's huge. So it really, although I don't have the teaching career that I had previously, I can see so many applications for just a few things that we talked about today. So I can't imagine what it's like to be part of the coaching group that you have and be with others. And I think it's just really exciting what you're doing, and so needed.
Thank you so much. It was so great meeting you. And thank you very much for the work that you're doing to bring community to yoga teachers around the world.